for me, motherhood is very emotional. Being a mother is a very, like, if anything can make me cry, it's that.
Yeah.
That's it'll get me every time. Anything will get me there. And I think I mean, for me, and I can only speak for me because I know that not all mothers feel like this, but for me, it is a very, very dear and special role to me. And I hold it very, very close to my heart. And I think, um, I don't know if you relate to that, but I think that for me anyway, um, that's why I may have, back in those days especially, I had so many expectations of myself, and I had so many judgments towards myself, was because it was such a special, it was so dear to me and obviously this little person is so dear to me. So it's so, I think that's why the emotions are so intense. At least for me. I don't know, what are your thoughts for you?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think I'm probably somebody that naturally has quite high expectations and ideas on myself.
Yeah.
Certainly not at any point in my journey did I feel like anybody else was pressuring me to breastfeed or formula feed, or my family and my partner and his family and my friends are all supportive about, you do what you feel is best.
Yeah.
We're happy to support you whatever way, and that really helped. It didn't change my expectations or thoughts on myself.
Yeah.
It probably helped a little bit because with the guilt, it felt like it was only my guilt. It wasn't that I was feeling guilty that other people were judging me or anything like
Yeah,
that,
or you'd
which
be letting other
helped.
people down. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And my partner was and is amazing. He was basically like, look, let's, do you want to give formula a go to give you a break? Or and when I said I wanted to keep trying, he goes, that's cool, that's fine. And then we kept having conversations about it, and I'd ask him what he thought. He goes, well, at the end of the day, it's up to you. And I was saying, well, yeah, but I also want to know your opinions because this is your child. Yes, it's my body in terms of the breastfeeding, but actually, I don't feel like I can make this decision on my own. And I value the support that I'm getting. So I think I was really grateful that I wasn't getting those sorts of pressure from anybody else. It was just from myself, which was hard enough.
Yeah.
But I think that's probably also why it took me so long to get help, because I was like, nah, she'll be right, get through this thing and then we'll be fine. And I think looking back, other people were looking at me sideways going, yep, we probably. But even if it was suggested, it was probably not fully taken on board. And it wasn't until one day at Space that, through Play Centre, they'd organised for 2 psychologists to come and talk who had been mums through Space as well. And there was a few things that they said that I was like, okay, we're past the point of normal. Yep, this has been going on for too long, and at too high of a level, I need to get some help. And so right after Space that day, I messaged our nurse, who had been coming out, who'd been doing extra visits because of the poor weight gain and things. And I know that she had been kind of prompting me and how do you feel? And as a health professional myself, I could definitely see that, and I was ignoring it and pushing it to one side because, as I said, I'm stubborn. But I messaged her and said, hey, look, we've just had these psychologists come to Space, and I think I'm at the point that I need help. Can you refer me to maternal mental health? And she rang me basically straight away and sort of just asked a few questions like, okay, what's brought you to this point, and bits and pieces, and she got the referral away that day. And I heard from them, I think, within 2 weeks. Unfortunately, again, short-staffed, not enough resources, and so there wasn't a lot that they could offer me, because I felt like I really just needed to talk to somebody and process through a lot of the stuff. I felt like I needed to try that rather than going straight to medication, because I felt like there was a really good chance that had that been addressed, that I didn't actually need medication. But because I didn't need more significant help or medication, I basically didn't fit into their service. And because I'd started feeling a wee bit better as well, so essentially I was discharged. And I was going, that's cool, but I'm still not right. And then, of course, there was no funded help anywhere, and the psychologist had mentioned Mothers Helpers at Space that day, and so I looked more into that, and that's how I got in. And I remember Gina ringing me for the initial assessment, and it kind of went bleh. And I was like, and this happened, and this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, and she's like, okay. And it was great. It was just having somebody to talk to, and we visited the option of medication a few times, and I said, look, I'm actually feeling like things are starting to clear because I've had a chance to work through it. And one of the big conversations I had with Gina was about my fear about feeling like I'd dealt with it and things were okay, but then coming around to next pregnancy and birth becoming a bit of a basket case because I hadn't dealt with it as well as I thought I had. And so we spent a bit of time working through that, and in the meantime I'd also accessed some other supports as well. Matrescence New Zealand, I've done 2 courses through them, so I actually became a breastfeeding peer supporter and did the training locally, because partly for my own learning and going, if I'd known that prior, that probably would have been helpful, but partly also if I could just help one other person to not have quite as shit of a time as I did. And so because I did that, I did a like a postpartum course through matrescence for peer supporters, health professionals, etc., which was absolutely amazing. And again, all this stuff, I'm going, this is what we need to know at antenatal, not how to bath a baby. Like, that's a little bit easier to figure out. Things about your mental health and that transition into motherhood are way more important. And so I've actually recommended that course to anybody I know having a baby. And I had somebody just message me last week going, oh, look, I've just had the first session of that course that you recommended, and it was awesome. And I've also helped a couple of people from breastfeeding peer support. And like, okay, this has helped my journey because I've managed to help someone else. So it's come a bit of a full circle. And I think there are still days when my mood kind of just dips a little bit and it all seems quite hard. And I don't think you ever know what's kind of normal for anyone in that position, or what is maybe sort of tipping the balance for you. I mean, potentially medication might have helped. It might still help. But that also then led into concerns for feeding when we're already having so many issues with feeding. And so I'm quite pleased in one aspect that I've managed to feel like I've relatively come through the other side without having to go down that path. And not that it's a negative path or anything like that. It was just that I felt frustrated that I could easily get funding for medication. Like
Yeah,
that's all funded through the
I
government.
know.
But actually, that doesn't take away the trauma. That
No.
doesn't take away those memories. That doesn't take away when I'm watching a movie or a TV program and there's a birth happening, even though it's not a real life birth, me kind of breaking out a sweat and going, ugh.
Yeah.
And that was my point with maternal mental health was, yeah, cool, I could be on medication, I could be feeling better, but that doesn't actually take away what's causing those feelings.
Mm.
And so
And in the first instance, you really needed to talk about things,
yeah,
and that's what you wanted. And
yeah.
I think yeah, when so when you were you at any point kind of aware that you might have had PTSD symptoms, or did Gina mention that to you, or anything along those lines, or?
I probably with my work background, so I do some work with sensitive claims through ACC.
Yeah.
I've got clients that have been through sexual or emotional trauma. Not that this compares at all, but just I've worked with people with trauma, and I think deep down I knew I did, but I was trying to push
Yeah.
it to the side. And I was very much in that mentality of, okay, once we're through this thing, it'll be fine.
Yeah.
Things will get better, and trying to be optimistic. And
Mm.
I think, again, like I said before, I think if I'd had just one of those things, like troubles with feeding or issues with the dairy and the weight gain in my baby or the
Yeah.
birth,
Mm.
I wouldn't have necessarily felt like that was traumatic, but the combination
Yeah.
of everything together.
I
And
hear
by the
you. Yeah, I
time,
really do.
yeah,
Mm.
and by the time I did a PTSD screen with Gina, it didn't sort of come above the certain level. And I said to her, I honestly think if I'd done that a month ago,
Yes.
it would have been probably double. And
Yeah.
she goes, yeah, like there's been a huge difference. When we first met, you were crying basically.
Mm.
Whatever we were talking about, you were basically crying, whereas now we're basically getting through a whole session and you're not crying at all.
Yeah.
So for both of us being able to see the difference was huge.
Yeah. That's really important, because what actually happens and what's actually happening there in real time is actually you showing, when you look back, probably having signs of PTSD early on, but that's starting to resolve
Yeah,
through debriefing, and therefore preventing PTSD. So actually, if you hadn't had that counselling, there is a chance that you may have gone on to have PTSD. So yeah, and so it's really kind of sad, really, that it took, I mean, we have low cost counselling, but it's
mm,
still, we have it funded in certain areas, but not all areas in New Zealand, and obviously I want that to change. Yeah, and the difference it made in that time, people dealing with PTSD, it's a hard road, on top of other things. But trauma, and also just to say, I'm hearing, sometimes we compare our stories to other people's stories, and our trauma is trauma, and from our brain's point of view, it doesn't distinguish. So your experience of trauma, your brain went into that fight, flight, freeze states, and your brain was traumatized as a result of your experience. And um, we all respond differently to different things, but the likelihood of you having the higher the stress, the more powerlessness, the higher the stressors and the prolonging of the stress and the helplessness and the feeling of not having a voice or not having power over something, loss of control, all of those things, make that more likely. And I think it's just really important to just validate your experience. And your traumatized brain is a traumatized brain regardless of the reason, if that makes sense. And so from your point of view, did you found the counselling sessions helpful?
Yeah, I did. And I think with a few other things that I'd done in the background as well, like that introduction to matrescence course, etc. Because after birth and going through that period, I felt really underprepared. I knew that I couldn't account for everything, but I felt like some of the stuff I know now, I wish I'd known beforehand. And I mean, one of them being intrusive thoughts, and finding out through that matrescence course that actually that is quite normal, versus you're already got all these hormones and emotions and everything going around, and then you have these intrusive thoughts, but you also don't want to say them to anybody because you think you're potentially going to have your baby taken off you, or people look at you a bit closer. Whereas now, knowing that actually they are normal for the majority of people, that is actually something I've shared with other people that are becoming new mums. I've said, hey, look, if this happens, it is relatively normal. Obviously, there's a degree where you might need to get help, but don't be afraid to talk to somebody about them, because that in itself, probably keeping that to myself, because it scared me, and it scared me in fact, of having them, but B, about not wanting to tell anybody, because I didn't want anybody to be starting to assess of whether they needed to take my baby off me. Because I knew deep down that I was getting confused by those thoughts, because I was like, I don't want that to happen. But even just intrusive thoughts to the extent of going, oh, what if the baby falls off the change table? And I struggled with ones like that, because it is also a normal thought to worry about, so that you prevent it from happening. But I just felt like there was no education around that and anything that we did leading up to having a child. And I think that contributes as well, because all the stuff that you don't know, and you don't know what you don't know, and then you find out about it later, or you experience it and you go, okay.
Because I think the distress that you have, your response to what's going on, almost and distress sometimes of how you're feeling, almost makes that bigger and more stressful. Whereas once understanding and being able to know, oh, this falls into the realm of normal, a normal thing that mothers experience, you can kind of feel a little bit of the weight dropping off you, of the worry about it. And it's like, okay, well, I'm having one of those thoughts again. That's normal. And kind of moving on, as opposed to getting really worried about it. And it's scary. It's scary because quite often with those intrusive thoughts, you have this deep fear that you're going to act on it. And of course you're not. It's the last thing that you're going to do. I remember I used to get these intrusive thoughts this a long time ago when I was driving my car, that I might, like, especially like on the Harbour Bridge, because I lived in Auckland for most of the time. And so I'd have this intrusive thought that either to drive off the bridge, or to just, if I'd have this thought of, if I just moved my steering wheel a slight bit, I would crash into a truck. And it's
Yeah.
terrifying, because of course
Yeah.
why would I ever just move my steering wheel to crash into a truck? But you're so
And you feel like you're
terrified
having
that
this,
you're gonna
I
act
know,
on that. Awful.
and you're having this internal dialogue in your head, and then you think you're going crazy because you're talking to yourself in your head, because you're going, oh, why would I do that? Oh yeah, but what if it
And why
happened?
am I having this thought? Why is that thought in
Yeah,
my head? What's wrong with me? Yeah, it's awful. And
yeah,
yet it
it's
is a very common, and it's a very common thing. When the more anxious you are in general, the more often those
yeah,
intrusive thoughts just jump in there. But they are scary, because you have the fear comes of, what if I act on that?
yeah,
That's the really, and you're not going to do that. There's no
no,
way that the fact that you're terrified about it is clear that you're not going to do it. But it
yeah.
is horrible.
And I
But
think when
yeah, no, people don't talk about it, do they?
no,
And
no, and I
yeah,
think when I finally did say to somebody, that's exactly what they said. The fact that you are terrified about it, shows us that you're not going to act on it. I was like, but
yeah,
nobody talks about this. If I'd known that, then I would have felt a bit more
yeah,
comfortable with it.
yeah. And did you end up, and I don't know, sorry, but did you end up doing the program through Mothers Helpers as well?
No, I think from the initial assessment, Gina and I talked about the birth and breastfeeding being the
Yeah,
main things that I needed to address, and she said
yeah,
they don't talk about those things usually in the group. So
yeah,
no, we went with the one-on-one.
yeah. Yeah, so sometimes it's just working out what's going to be what's going to be best for you. Um, I would I would think that that the program would have been helpful, especially because you're so open to learning and talking about things. But at the same time, I get that, because it's um, sometimes when you have got quite a lot of trauma, other people's conversations can trigger you. And if they haven't experienced trauma, they're not necessarily aware that someone else might be triggered by that. So especially about things like birth, people, or feeding, they might just kind of mention it offhand and not realize that it was a trauma trigger for you. And so I would imagine that's probably where Gina was coming from, was just wanting to settle those triggers and traumas a wee bit, so that and address that specifically, because quite often that depression is almost secondary to a trauma response. Yeah. So so you feel like that some of those symptoms are settling. Where do you feel like you're at now?
Um, pretty good most of the time. I think as much as it sort of was really hard at the time about coming back to work a bit earlier than I planned, it was also quite helpful because I knew what to do at work. I feel like I'm generally quite good at my job, so I could come to work, do what I needed to do, not feel like I was failing or that I didn't know what I was doing most of the day like I had been at home. And so that really helped, I think, my mental health and gave me a bit more of a routine again.
Mm,
So I think on the whole, I'm generally pretty good. I think I've learned a lot about myself and
mm,
looking a bit more into sensory and stimulation and things, that actually there are some things that probably just set me off a little bit. And I now know that other babies crying, yeah, they can be a little bit irritating if it's ongoing, but don't bother me. Whereas my own babies cry, I cannot handle that. It's like a
mm,
drill in my brain. And so I think some days there still has to be quite careful management about how I handle things. But on the whole, I feel pretty good, and it's just making sure that I look after my own physical and mental health to keep feeling good,
yeah.
and trying to just balance everything and try and make sure I'm getting enough exercise and bits and pieces.
Yeah. So for you, you and Gina kind of worked out together what you needed to do to really take care of that, of your mental
Yeah,
health and your physical health and stuff.
yeah.
Um, and when you, so I want to come back to that a little bit, but before I do, I really wanted to ask you, when you look back on all of this, what do you think? Because we are coming up to Maternal Mental Health Awareness Week, and um, I guess I'm just really curious to know, what do you think needs to change in maternal mental health
Um,
that would have really helped? I mean, you were in a really difficult situation with the COVID situation, and unfortunately, we've had years of these stories of, and because really you were, I think it sounds like we weren't having lockdowns at that
no,
point, but we've still got COVID in the community.
yeah,
And so this has really been going on since 2020. So we're
yeah.
into our third kind of, um, well, into it, yeah, our third
Mm,
year sort of these ongoing stories, and of people experiencing less support, of not having their families with them, or experiencing staff shortages, or what have you.
mm,
Um, so we are definitely having more and more experiences of mothers who have experienced trauma. And so I'm guessing that some of that, um, you probably feel like, well, maybe they were doing the best that they could under the circumstances. But is there, looking back on your situation, are there things that you think that they could have done that would have really, really helped?
mm.
That's number one. And number two, from a maternal mental health situation, what do you think that we need to be doing better?
Um, uh, I've been asked these questions a couple of times actually, and my answers are probably still the same. And the fact that staffing and resources, and we know in New Zealand that this is down. It's not just because of COVID. This was an issue before
Mm,
COVID.
yeah.
I'm a health professional. I have worked in the hospital. It's not just now,
Mm,
but that means that people are not getting the right support at the right time to the intensity that they need. So that kind of started off our journey. And while, yeah, we kind of got enough, we didn't get what we really needed. And then from a mental health point of view, I think the matrescence education that I've learned, that to me was hands down far more relevant and necessary than any of
the
than most
antenatal
of the
classes.
stuff in antenatal.
Yeah.
And then just having access to kind of the in between where you don't fit into the mental health service, but you don't have anything funded. And technically, I had the likes of EAP through work, but I felt
Mm,
like in this situation, I really needed somebody that knew maternal side of things.
yeah.
Um, and like we just made it happen. It was a bit tough financially,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
we were in a position to be able to make it happen. Whereas I know a
Mm,
lot of people that I've spoken to, they're not even in the
no.
position to fund the low cost counselling.
Yeah.
But again, it's this whole middle class, isn't it? We don't
Yes.
earn enough to be really comfortable with and be able to pay for everything, but we're not in that lower socioeconomic group where we get everything funded, which
Mm,
leaves you in that really tough spot. And even now that affects us, we don't get daycare subsidy, but we have to have her in daycare so that we can work.
mm,
Um, so none of that's going to change overnight, if
mm.
ever. But yeah, some more funding and availability of services is
Yeah.
probably the biggest. Yeah, yeah.
It's something that we've advocated for. I think it's really helpful to hear, that you didn't just want a general counselling, or you wanted someone who specialized in maternal mental health, and it is actually a special area. It isn't. Yes, general counselling will be helpful, but not as helpful as people who specialise in it. And I think that's the argument that I've taken to primary health organisations who do offer some funded counselling, is that it's just being dumped into that general mental health space, and it's got some really unique things going on, and the things that you've talked about today, are specific to becoming a mum, and just also to mention as well, with Mothers Helpers, we do a preparing for parenthood course, which is also focusing on the psychological transition to becoming a parent, and it's for it's actually for couples.
Oh, cool.
We would, if we had enough demand, we would also run it for sole parents, but they're very specifically, they're so different that we don't combine that, because they're it's so different. But if we had the demand, we would definitely run it for sole parents. But in the meantime, we run it for couples, and that's really helpful because we talk about expectations, we talk about feeding, expectations around feeding, emotions, feelings around feeding, around and not just the birth, but just all of the becoming a parent. What do we think internally? What do we think is a good mum? And I've sat down with some mums in our Out of the Fog program, group therapy, and sometimes I've said, let's write down all the things that you feel it makes a good mum, and we end up with this massive list. And then I read it back to them, and I say, when you hear me reading this back to you, what are your thoughts and feelings? And it's always, this is ridiculous. This is impossible. It's impossible. So you set yourself up to fail, and the failing is just being a failure at this job that is so important to you, so dear to your heart. So we kind of, one of the things that we work on is how can we let go of some of these unrealistic expectations and actually, bring in some more realistic expectations about what is a good mum, what is a good parent. So for you going forward, you talked about taking care of your mental health and your physical health. You talked about exercise. What are some of the other things that you have learned that you need to do to take care of you?
Having something that I'm good at, that I know how to do it and what to do. And also just having some time where I'm not having to think as a mum, because it's not just about her, it's about the rest of the household, about what needs done, and actually just having a bit of a break from that. And sometimes that is going to the grocery shop, and sometimes that is doing something that is not household or child related.
100%. And that's a little bit about identity as well, isn't it? Because you had an identity before this whole mother gig. You had this whole identity outside of being a mum. And sometimes it gets swallowed up by this whole new role. So it's sometimes kind of just bringing some of that back in, right?
Yes.
Thank you so much for talking.
Thank you.
I really appreciate it, and and go well in your journey.
Thank you. And thank you so much with Mothers Helpers. It's honestly been really helpful in this journey.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. Okay.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thanks,
Zelandia.
Kristina. Bye.